the Wiggly Podcast. The Archers, but real. Welcome, dear listener, to the Wiggly Podcast. I'm Heather from Wiggly Wigglers. I'm joined today by
Farmer Phil
and Richard.
Hooray, team! We're back on the Wiggly sofa. Everything is jolly. It's a lovely day. And on this week's show, we've got sheep shearing. We've got lots of bits from India, where Phil and I were at the World Environment Foundation's conference on climate change. We hear from Ricardo, who's been at Gardener's World sorting out folks' clematis. Bet that took some doing, didn't it, Rich?
That certainly did. Yeah.
Now, for those of you who may have listened in last week, and if you haven't, may I suggest you go back, you may notice that Michael had to switch the equipment off. Right at the point where the boys got a little irate and there was a few insults flying, and then they went outside for a bit of fisticuffs. Well, happy now, little boys?
Yeah. Well, sort of.
What do you think, Richard?
Completely.
Are you not my friend?
No, completely. Well,
No.
Oh dear.
Not my friend. Yeah, it's funny. It takes me back to no, it doesn't matter. That's just completely irrelevant. Yeah, that was funny. Yeah, no.
I'll give you one of my nice bottles of beer.
You're always my friend. That's definitely going to make amends.
Right.
Yeah.
What about the hat? Is that any good from India?
The hat you brought me back is lovely. That's a very decent thing, actually. Yeah, it was lovely to have a hat because I need a proper warm hat for fishing. So you've given me a hat that's made out of, I don't know, someone's pussy cat, hopefully. And,
it's a goat.
It's got a lovely little. It's great. It's beautiful and warm, and it's the right size as well. So I can't know how you manage that, but it's probably one size fits all, is it?
No, we tried on different sizes and imagined your head.
Yes.
And I was the model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So
and we worked out everybody's head size and went from there.
I was thrilled. So I was thrilled with my hat. That's a great present, and my tea as well, my green tea, which I'm going to tuck into a bit later on.
So let's go. We're just a few hours after the big row. Here we go, team. Well, welcome back, dear listener, to the Wiggly Podcast, which had to be cut off in mid-flow by Michael due to the fact that the boys got a bit aerated in the organic versus conventional department, as if that's unusual. Well, I'm on my own now because they're outside bashing each other. Oh, they've just gone by the window. Ricardo seems to have dug his teeth into Farmer Phil's nose and hopefully they'll be back soon. Thanks for listening to today's show. Bye from me, Heather. Only joking, they're here. Happy again, lads?
Yes, ecstatic.
I think I've found the soft underbelly of Ricardo. He seems quite agitated, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So do you, Farmer Phil, actually.
I'm always agitated. I have to deal with DEFRA.
So anyway, we'll leave that now because it was so contentious that it was nearly... was it nearly a walkout, Rich?
There's no one, heaven forbid, ever walking out from an argument. But it could have gone to a whole new level, which, in the interests of future employment, would have been the best thing for me.
Well,
Health and safety.
Look on the bright side, Rich. I'm sorry I called you a hypocrite, which obviously did wind you up, but at least...
Is that the first sorry we've ever had on the podcast?
That's the first time Phil's ever was only sorry to me.
And me.
First time Phil's ever apologised.
It could have been worse, Rich. I could have called you Ginger as well.
I think you're getting a bit cocky,
We've
Phil.
had that. Yeah.
Right, what about the garden, Rich?
The garden, well, going back to the whole sheep thing, it's funny because I the other day, my mate Richard, while he was vaccine, said, oh, you should come down and get your two little ewes and bring them down to us when we're shearing. And I said, rightio, yeah, brilliant. So anyway, I float down to his place, just down below the village, picked up his trailer and bombed back to my field. and then attempted to get my 2 little Rylands into the trailer because they wouldn't go. So I had to physically catch them and sort of drag them across the field and pop them into the trailer, and off I went down, and they were in there shearing. And do you know what? It was the most beautiful thing, because I turned up, and he lives just above the Y. It's a lovely, lovely spot. And I walked into this shed, and there were these 2 Welsh fellas shearing away, a couple of older women on the top, doing sweeping and chatting and things like that. There was an old fella who was there grabbing hold of the fleeces and folding them and tossing them into a bag. And Richard was there with his sheep drench, he was holding the sheep, and actually taught me how to worm the sheep as well. So I've got this stuff that I need to worm the sheep with as well. Oh my God. Anyway, so I stuck, you have to stick your thumb in their mouths, and you kind of hold their heads up, and they seem to stand there for it. And so he did this, and they were rattling and things like that. And I got my 2, and they put them in there, and they sheared them and whatnot. And I was watching how they held them and how they sort of sat them on the just to the side of their derriere, so as it's not uncomfortable. And they were explaining this to me.
Did you have a go at shearing?
Fantastic. No, I didn't have a go at shearing. I didn't have a shearing. The reason I didn't have a go at shearing because I had to rush off home because I was going to do an interview for BBC London on worms and bokashi, so I had to frape home for that. So I was rushing to get back to the telephone because these guys were ringing me at 6:30.
I've shorn a sheep.
And put them in there and did that. So did you?
9 minutes.
9 minutes.
I've shorn 11 sheep.
Did you cut? Because I didn't cut it. Because they sometimes have a little nicks on them, don't they?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you shear them on a hot day, the wool rises. So the oil rises the wool up, so there's a space underneath where you can just go and get the shears in, and it just comes off beautifully.
Right.
But if you shear them on a cold day, I couldn't do that.
And the other thing that I couldn't get used to was that the chap who was teaching me was a New Zealander, so broadly speaking, you were shearing them end to end rather than round them. Because
we did round them.
The English style is to shear round the sheep,
right?
Whereas the New Zealand style is to shear end to end, roughly. With apologies to all experts on the subject. But they don't actually hold the sheep; it just sits there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They just rest it against them and let it roll away from them and shear it as it goes.
Yeah.
And it gets up and the fleece is there.
Yeah.
But mine got up before I'd finished, so I finished 2 with them standing up.
So what's that got to do with gardening then?
I said gardening. Well, so I had these 2 fleeces, because I have my 2 fleeces, and they said, do you want to do? I said, yeah, I'll do those. So I went home and I've used them to mulch around my soft fruit bushes, which are looking good this year. I think it's perhaps because we had a lot of rain, didn't we, earlier on in the spring, and I think the soft fruit has done well off the back of that.
Yeah, our strawberries are looking fantastic.
They are looking good. So we'll be in there feasting on those soon.
I saw a product the other day where a chap was using wool as a constituent to make potting compost.
Yes, we're going to start supplying that. Wiggly, it's going to be a new Wiggly product, a combination of wool and bracken.
That's it.
I like the idea of that because where they harvest bracken, where they constantly cut bracken, it does serve to increase biodiversity on hillsides and whatnot. So I like the idea of using that bracken. So it's incorporating a vegetation that could be problematic with another product that's not being used to its full potential anymore because it's too inexpensive.
Because not very far away from here they cut and bale bracken to use as bedding in stockyards in the winter. Right. It's a bit harsh on the machinery because obviously the terrain is a bit rough and ready.
I've seen it baled up on the top, on the other side of Hay Bluff and whatnot. I've seen it being baled up there. Bracken. But also another thing we're doing, made of sheep's wool is slug pellets. Well, they're slug pellets, but they are pelleted sheep's wool, and you put them around the plants, and the stuff expands, and it deters slugs and snails because it has a certain moisture absorbing qualities, and they quite literally get absorbed as they go across it. So that's a nice little product as well, what we're going to start doing.
Good
Lord, I've tried it around the hostas. It works a treat. Yeah.
You've tried it around your hostas?
Yeah, I've tried it around the hostas and it works a treat. So especially the one hosta that's particularly vulnerable by the side of the pond, it gets munched every year, no matter what I seem to do, but because it's there and it's tasty. I've put it around that, and it's hopefully it should flower this year. So that's looking good.
And of course now you're an expert on clematis.
Yeah, an expert on clematis. I went to BBC Gardeners World Live yesterday to the subscribers lounge to do my stint on the Ask the Expert desk, and I was tasked, knowing a great deal about organic wildlife gardening, the wildlife gardening side certainly. But people wanted to ask me about growing vegetables, and they wanted to know what the pests were on their clematises and all sorts of things like that, which is kind of weird. So I gave them the answers that I think that they should have had.
Did you get into growing veggies in tyres? Because we've got a bit of feedback here from Martin Grant.
Yeah.
About our feature about
because you
tyres.
know, you and I and Michael, we're going to go to Hay, weren't we, and do our thing. And then Rachel and I were talking about some tyres. It was a school project I was just about to undertake at the end of the month, and I was going to use chipped tyres in their paths, but I've decided against that subsequently since finding out about the leaching of all sorts of dodgy contaminants in tyres.
Would I read it out?
Yeah, have a read what Martin says.
Richard, it was interesting to hear the podcast about all the nasties leaching from granulated rubber made from old tyres. I would agree that synthetic turf industry has been guilty of lazy science when stating the case for this type of infill with synthetic turf pitches, STPs. I'm not involved in the manufacture or direct use of STPs, but I have been involved in the assessment of applications for and management of lottery funds that have been used to provide STPs at schools in Scotland. Leaving aside the fact that STPs are inherently bad for the environment, as they have a great deal of embedded energy included in their manufacture, I have to take exception to your statement that grass is an alternative to STPs. AstroTurf is a brand name, so it shouldn't be used. Grass pitches are for a vast majority of the year unplayable due to weather conditions affecting the pitch. When they are usable, that use is limited due to the need to allow the grass to recover. STPs allow the delivery of outdoor sports all year round at schools where grass pitches are unsuitable due to climatic conditions or whether the other alternative has been red blaze, a byproduct of the oil shale industry. Moving PE and sport outdoors often frees space for indoor sports to be delivered. Where an STP is to be used, then rubber crumb is not the only infill available. Sand and water can be used. You were also right about the listener being interested in Rachel's owl. I, for one, do wish to know where it came from. Martin Grant. And we've got that feedback on the Facebook group too.
Right.
Lots of people want to know where the owl came from.
Right. So we're still waiting for that. So
Yeah, we haven't heard.
I think Rachel's going to chase it
I think
up.
they're still flicking through the card index myself.
Yeah, I do. I think it's all down to the card index and they should get up to date in the old computer job. So, Rich, any comments on Martin, Rich?
No, it's great that he's got back to us. So,
And are we pro or anti using tyres for growing taties?
I think I'd probably be fairly anti at the moment, unless I find some other evidence that suggests that it's perfectly okay. These things possibly are bioaccumulative in the body. You know, if you're growing your spudiators in your car tyres all the time, you could be causing yourself all sorts of untold problems.
My comment would be, having seen tyres used on silage clamps, that it takes a lot of years before the tyre starts to degrade, which is when I think that they'll start to leach nasties. And the example I give is that when you pick it up and it leaves all black all over you, that's when it's starting to degrade.
Yeah.
But they're 10, 15, 20 years old by then.
Okay.
A new tyre, so fresh off the car, I don't think you get anything out of that. And the other issue, which is probably relevant to the comments about synthetic surfaces, is that if you chop up car tyres with a steel belting in them, steel wire in them effectively, you can end up in trouble with those little bits of wire getting into things, so that terylene belted tyres are better. But in terms of growing taters in tyres, if you insist on using the same tyres for 10 years in a row, then I suspect that the sun may degrade the tyre in the end. But unless the price of oil gets to the point that we never wear out any more tyres, if you change your tyres, have a fresh set of tyres each year to grow your taters in, I'm sure there's no risk at all.
Maybe we should all just move to Bridgestone tyres, because they don't sell tyres anymore. They just rent you the miles that you do on your tyres and then take the tyre back. That's a great idea, I think.
Looking at the state of the tyres on the back wheels of your car, you're going to have a bit of rental to pay.
The Wiggly Podcast, bringing your garden to life.
Right. Now that you're on the opposite side of me, Phil, I'm intrigued. How do you get on with your shenanigans around India?
Well, it was amazing. I mean, I've never been to Asia before, So it was a completely new experience. And we heard last week a little bit from Dr. Mehra about the climate change conference. And we met a number of people at the climate change conference, which was somewhat surreal, given that these people included ex-prime ministers of Sweden and editors of this, that, or the other national newspaper and advisors.
Only one of each.
And so that was fascinating and sort of thrilling. And then coupled with that, you've got all the sights and sounds and smells of India and sort of travelling around, in our case, the northern areas of India, and the beauty of the Himalayas sort of contrasting with the muck and rubbish of some of the shanty towns.
Place, isn't it? It's a real eye-opener. What did you... The thing I'm not sure about, I'm still puzzled over, is the conference. What was it all about? I mean, as you say, climate change conference, what was it?
Well, essentially...
A national climate change conference, an international affair? Or?
It is an international affair, and the idea of the conference organisers, who are essentially a mixture of sort of global organisations, but in this case with an Indian sort of slant on it, if you like, is to bring to the world's attention the issues of climate change and try and collect together some of the potential solutions to it.
But in a business environment.
And essentially, I think the idea was that if business is going to succeed, then you have to have growth. But that growth has to be in such a way that it either alleviates or at least stands still in terms of contributing to climate change.
One of the main aspects was the Golden Peacock Awards. So they award these national Indian awards to companies that are ahead in health and safety and environment practice and that sort of thing. Right. And the idea is to set up examples of good practice to encourage people to be more sustainable rather than keep beating people up.
Right.
So there were some massive corporations who got awards, people employing, hundreds of thousands of people. I think that was the main emphasis, but also to get the leaders to get together and exchange views. So there was the leader of the Sikhs, for example, who came and spoke, and all sorts of ministers, the environment minister from India. And it seems to me that it's in quite a pickle.
Right.
So something needs to be done. Yeah. And they've got such an influence, 1.1 billion people, 200 million people living on less than 25p, 700 million people in poverty.
Yeah.
It's serious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some of their statistics, wasn't it that I told you that I found out that the Indian Railway network employs 2 million people? Well, when you consider the logistics of one organisation employing 2 million people, one, it gives you some idea of the size of the place.
Yeah.
But two, if you raise a sector of the population out of poverty, the effects could be disastrous. 200 million people living below or at or below the poverty line, if you get them above the poverty line, the first thing they're going to want is a fridge. Well, 200 million fridges is not to be sneezed at. And so that this is a real difficult nut to crack for them, because they recognise the need to do something about, assessing their effect on climate and pollution and whatever else. But at the same time, politically, they aspire to improve the lives of their population. And the two things don't seem to fit very comfortably together. So that the idea of the conference was to allow businesses to grow in a commercial sense, but if you like, to do it responsibly.
Okay. And
it made it quite interesting.
Good.
So we ended up having a trip to the Dalai Lama's house.
Right.
He wasn't there. With the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Ola Alston, the editor of the Times Hindi, Man Mohan, and the scientific advisor to the Agricultural Minister, Randall Gupta.
Right.
So we snatched a couple of interviews with them. And so here we are in the village of MacLeod Ganj, right up in the Himalayas. It's boiling hot. There's lots of sounds of the village about, and it's where the Tibetans have walked right over the mountain from Tibet and sought refuge.
Wow.
Okay, dear Wiggly listener, I am sat in the foothills of the Himalayas I'm in the Dalai Lama's place where he lives, and I'm very pleased to welcome to the Wiggly Podcast Dr. Ola Ulsten, who is the former Prime Minister of Sweden, and Mahmood, who is the editor of The Times in Delhi. So thank you very much for coming on the show. Ola, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, why are you in India talking about climate change from a Swedish point of view?
I'm not talking about it from the Swedish point of view. I'm talking about it from a global point of view. And that India, and certainly this particular part of India, is a very good spot to be, because you can just look around here and see what it would mean if the glaciers here would melt and all the riverbeds would dry up for good. Well, we know that just in the case of the Ganges, 500 million people are depending on their drinking water and irrigation water from that river. So it's a very good outlook for talking global warming.
And what is your involvement with the World Environment Foundation and the convention that we've just attended?
Well, I'm part of the Council for Corporate Governance, where we are talking about what corporations can do. And I'm very encouraged by seeing how much interest there is on this subject from business people in India, of business people from small and middle-sized and big companies. And they come in droves to this conference and they present their achievements and we give them an award for it. And it's very encouraging to see and listen to the enthusiasm with which they talk about what they have accomplished in terms of greening their production.
But with due respect, when you travel up from Delhi to Palampur, the sights that you see don't necessarily encourage you to think that perhaps India is the greenest of countries. And as I understand it, the poverty is so high that I would anticipate that as soon as people get above that poverty line, that they really want the things that you've got, Ola, at home, and I've got, which are fridges, freezers, tumble dryers. So how can a few businesses possibly have any impact on the problem?
Well, first of all, climate change will hurt the poor more than the rich, because the poor people usually are more directly in touch with nature, and we suffer the most from flooding and all the other problems. Second, I don't think we should talk in terms of having to give up on a better standard of living. It's just a matter of doing things differently. Driving cars that doesn't take gasoline, producing fridges that don't take the type of substance that they used to take. CFC to cause the ozone layer, etc. I think we sometimes talk about the need to slow down or even go zero growth. But I don't think that is what we should talk about. We should talk about achieving growth, generating growth through other means. That's what we have to do. And we should not deny anybody to rise, but by other means. And there are such means. There's a lot of technology out there. It's just a matter of using it.
And what about Sweden in comparison to India?
You can't compare Sweden to India. We have 9 million. They are 1 billion or more here. This is a large country, and Sweden is a very easily governed place on earth. People usually do what they are being told by government. I think what we have in common is about the problem with the climate change will be felt everywhere, more or less. Looking at it from a Swedish point of view, you can only say we are very privileged. I think you British should say the same.
I think you're probably right.
So the responsibility is heavier on us to do something, because we have the means to do it before we start the poor people to make sacrifices.
Thank you. Mahmood, I know that you run a newspaper which has many hundreds of thousands of readers. what have you taken from the Climate Change Convention, and is there anything that you can do as the media to communicate the message to folks?
I've been coming here for the last 2 years to attend this convention, but I've been attending climate change conferences in other parts of the country also. Unfortunately, climate change and all global warming, all such related issues are very low priority in the Indian media, and some of us who are very much aware about the danger to come in another decades or so. So we are trying to educate our people. Still, unfortunately, it's like a world over. The newspapers are more governed by the marketing and making profits. For them, the cricket, like in India, is a cricket crazy country, and the film industry, the glamour. And now, because the economy is growing at a 9.5% rate annually, so we started counting billionaires and millionaires, and the number of poor people, which is increasing. The contrast is increasing. We are not talking about them, and the poor man is the one we are worried about. He's going to be hit by the climate change more than the rich, because rich will always take care of himself.
Yeah.
So we, at least in my paper, I'm trying to do it something every week or fortnight, some feature, some interview, something. Last year I interviewed Mr. Ola.
Yeah.
Did an interview. We talk from the global point of view. We talk to the Indian delegates. Like, you come here, I'll be putting something in the paper what the British farmer thinks about it.
Yeah.
Her and his impression in India.
And do you try and keep a positive message, or do you go for doom and gloom?
Positive. We try to be positive.
Yeah.
With a of course, a positive. Nobody will take it seriously unless there is a streak of negativism also. That warning, that if you don't wake up now, your children are going to suffer.
I know we've talked to the both of you about climate change all through this weekend, but the thing is, we can talk about it all we like. If you've got one or two messages that you would send to people of practical things that they could do, not just talk about, what would those things be on your list of priorities? And don't just give me change the light bulbs, because we've done that.
I was just going to suggest changing light bulbs.
I'll go to
you asked for something easy to be done.
Yeah.
That is easy.
Yeah.
So that should be done. But that's just a symbolic thing, more. Well, and more than that. But I mean, it's something that you can reach for and do yourself. And there are lots of other things of the same kind that you could do. And then if you ask me as a former politician, I could give you a long list about things and even talk about how to achieve economic growth and all this and that.
Mama?
One has to be a bit tough. The government will have to come out with certain mandatory suggestions. But you have to do it. Like the government, the civil authorities should say that we will not permit or allow you to construct a new house or new building, whether it's any kind of commercial, residential, whatever, unless there is some percentage of space reserved for trees, not for flower plants, because then everybody will come take care of that. Okay, we have to green the whole. Make a provision for trees. You see, we are sitting at almost nearly 7,000 feet, is nearly 2,000 meters. These hills have been cut over decades, and there's a need to make them green again.
Yeah.
And these are the lungs of the whole country. There's a green, the Himalayas, and if they go down, the plains will also go down, and then there's no stopping.
Yeah.
They're the places from the glacier starts, the river starts. Nearly half of the country's population live on this river waters.
And I think I read that a tree holds just gallons and gallons of water, so when the flooding starts...
What kind of tree?
Does it?
No.
Well, obviously, I suppose if it's a tea bush...
You're a farmer, aren't you?
Well, a tree on a hill, like here, would hold a fair bit of water, would it?
But it also holds a lot of carbon.
Yeah.
And that's why the forest is so important when you're talking about climate change. Because one quarter, 25% of the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere comes from deforestation, that people are destroying the forest, not using the forest, destroying it. So, and that is enormous, because if you compare it with what the European Union countries have agreed to do, to cut down CO2 emission by 25%, that only helps to redo the increase coming from cutting down forests.
Yeah.
So there we have a big job to do. And it's not just a matter of stopping cutting down forests, but it's also a matter of planting new forests.
So in Sweden you produce quite a lot of paper. So how are you getting around the problem? Because you must be cutting down the trees just as India is.
Yeah, but we are restricted by law from 1902, to be precise, that tells you that for any tree you cut down, you have to plant a new one. So in fact, Sweden has about 50% more forest today than we had in 1902. And still we live on, and we live well on forest. It's about half of our income comes from export of forest products, pulp in particular, I suppose. That is why I keep telling people in developing countries too, who are so eager to get rid of the forest. There is money in the forest, there is development in the forest, there is everything in the forest. So keep it and use it in a responsible way, and you will be rich from it. And you will do something for the environment and in mitigating climate change as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now eat.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, there we are. That's the end of another Wiggly podcast. It's so nice that you've at least let peace break out, although I do sense a certain tension.
No, we're not tense at all.
Oh.
I think both of us have got fairly thick skins when it comes to exchanging insults with one another, of course. I'd have lamped anybody else.
Also, I think the truth of the matter is that we both want to get somebody from the organic farming organisations, whether it's the Soil Association or one of the others, and get them here on the sofa and have the discussion with the full SP, isn't it?
I'll get the spotlight and the mastermind chair, and you can be Magnus Magnusson.
Okay.
I will get onto it immediately and contact the organic farming reps and see if we can't get one on this sofa forthwith. Another week has gone by. We don't know what's happened about the owl. They're still flitting through their card index. We'll probably never know. It's bye from me.
And it's bye from me.
And it's bye from me.